What's up guys, Adam here, and today we're taking a look at the topic of buying a vintage lens. Now as you know, especially if you just started going ahead and buying your first DSLR camera, you'll quickly realize that the price of most lenses is actually significantly more than the price of the DSLR camera body itself. So you'll probably find that sometimes the price can be even double, even triple the price of the actual body for the actual DSLR camera. So today we're going to be assessing the topic of, is it worth going ahead and buying a vintage lens? And we're going to be looking at the advantage and disadvantage of going out and buying a vintage lens for your DSLR camera. Okay, so let's start off with the advantages. So advantage number one is definitely going to be the price. Now the price of most vintage lenses can pretty much sit anywhere as low as around about £10 and go up to around about more of the £50 plus region. But the overall advantage of actually buying a vintage lens is definitely going to be the price. They're going to be a lot cheaper than buying an equivalent lens. So for example, I have a 28mm Pango vintage lens that cost me around about £44 here in the UK. If I wanted to go ahead and get an equivalent Nikon or Canon version of this lens, it'll probably cost me around about over £200. So as you can see, there's going to be a massive difference in comparison to pricing when it comes to buying a newer lens and a vintage lens. Okay, so second advantage is definitely going to be the build quality. Now the lens that I have here, the Pango lens, is absolutely built out of complete metal. There's absolutely no plastic in this lens whatsoever. It's just completely metal and glass. So that is going to be a really good contributing factor when you go ahead and buy a vintage lens, because 9 times out of 10, if a lens is actually built well, it's also going to perform really well as well. And as you can see, this lens performs really well in comparison to a lot of the other lenses, or the newer lenses, or the newer versions of a lens like this. So having a lens that is built well, really built well. They always used to say that things weren't built like they used to, and they actually got a good point, because this lens right here is pretty much built like a tank. I can definitely say that. So definitely build quality is going to be an advantage that you're going to find with a lot of the older lenses, and that can sometimes, well, I'll say 9 times out of 10, perform and actually correlate well with good image and video quality as well. So the third advantage can actually be an advantage for some and a deal breaker for others, but I personally find an advantage, and that's going to be down to the vignetting effect around the outside of some of the vintage lenses. Now not all of these vintage lenses are able to go ahead and form this kind of look, but some, especially the older cinematography lenses or cine lenses, can actually achieve this naturally by just having the way the glass is formed. Gives you this kind of really smooth curve around the outside of the video. So if you're someone who's going to be shooting cinematography style, then that's definitely going to be an advantage for you, rather than having to do a lot of work for later on in post-production. Okay, now so moving on to the disadvantages going ahead and buying a vintage lens. The first disadvantage is going to be the compatibility. Now most of these vintage lenses are made by some of the companies that don't even exist anymore, and some of the companies have gone ahead and changed their style of mount. So for example, lenses like Minolta and Olympus tend to make lenses for a special and designated type of mount, which means you're gonna have to try and find some sort of adapter to go ahead and actually get those lenses to attach to your newer style of body, which can be kind of a deal breaker, because a lot of the cheaper actual style of mounts can actually degrade the overall quality of the lens, which means you have to go ahead and buy a really good lens adapter so you don't go ahead and degrade the quality of the lens, and make sure it's the right one to go ahead and connect to your camera. So that can be quite a deal breaker for some people when they go ahead and decide whether they want to go ahead and get a newer lens or a vintage lens. Is mainly going to be down to the overall compatibility of the lens and the camera model that you're going to be using. Okay, so the second disadvantage of actually going ahead and buying a vintage lens is the fact that these lenses are only going to be in manual. So there's absolutely no circuitry or electronics in these lenses whatsoever. So when you go ahead and set it to your camera, the camera itself has to be in manual mode. So everything from the focus and the f-stop has to be controlled on the lens itself, because there's no way for the lens and the camera to communicate together, because there's no electronic or circuitry or programming within the lens itself. So everything has to be controlled manually. So for those that shoot in manual anyway, this might not be too much of a disadvantage for you, but for those who shoot in automatic all the time, this kind of might be a deal breaker in the fact that you have to go ahead and start to try and shoot manual to go ahead and start using these vintage lenses. Okay, so the final disadvantage of going ahead and buying a vintage lens is going to be the overall condition of the lens itself. Now, a lot of these vintage lenses may have been lying around for quite a while. They haven't been used. They've actually built up a lot of fungus, a lot of dust, a lot of mold in the lens itself. Some of them also might have a broken focusing ring or a broken f-stop ring. So these are the things you have to be really cautious of when going ahead and buying a vintage lens. Make sure you go ahead and ask the seller, if you're going to be on eBay, about the overall condition of the lens. Make sure you've got plenty of photographic evidence that the lens is going to be in good condition before you go ahead and buy it. Of course, it's going to be something that's not really going to be go ahead and consider when you're buying a new lens. Of course, you're going to be buying an old used vintage lens. You really have to be careful about how the condition of the lens is going to be when you go ahead and receive it. And then guys, that's pretty much the advantages and disadvantages of going ahead and buying a vintage lens. Now in my case, I was looking to go ahead and get a wide angle, not too wide, but I wanted to get a wide enough angle that I can go ahead and shoot a roll, because I found that my 50mm lens from Nikon was way too cropped in. While it's good for B-roll, it wasn't so great for A-roll. So I needed to go ahead and find a wider lens, say around maybe 35 or 28mm. But I looked at some of the 28mm lenses from Nikon and even some third-party companies, and the price was just really extortion. I really wanted to go ahead and get a really inexpensive 28mm lens so I can go ahead and get a good bokeh effect or shadow depth of field look while not having to spend an extortionate amount of money. So I actually found this lens, and luckily for me, it was actually compatible with the Nikon F mount. So sometimes you tend to be lucky enough to go ahead and find a lens, a vintage lens that's actually compatible with your camera without an adapter. So I was actually quite lucky in that kind of regard. But always go ahead and do your homework and make sure the lens is going to be completely compatible with your camera, with or without the mount that's going to be required as well. Make sure the overall lens itself is going to be in good condition as well. And if the lens is able to go ahead and tick all of those boxes, I definitely can't see why you go ahead and spend the extra money on a new lens when you can go ahead and get a good quality vintage lens that's going to give you the same image and video quality. Anyway guys, it's been Adam here. Thank you for watching. Take care, and of course, I'll see you guys in the next tech video. Bye for now.